I'm Jessie David of Metal Wani, and joining me today, David Ellefson. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.
Absolutely. Now, you formed a brand new band called Dieth with members of Entombed A.D and Decapitated, and you guys are gearing up to release a brand new album, To Hell and Back, which drops June 2nd. Now, before we get into the album, I want to talk about the name because that's an interesting name right there.
It's a made-up word, and it's funny. I love made-up words. Like Aerosmith, Metallica. These words that are just kind of made up. I was just joking. We were shooting the video back in April over in Gdansk, Poland, for In the Hall of the Hanging Serpents, and I was joking, like using this kind of King's English. You must dieth unto yourself to start again, right? If you picture Game of Thrones, some guy with the drink in his hand, right? So that was where it came from. We put a little post up and put dieth on it just to kind of see if this reacts. Does anybody notice that at all? So that was where it came from, and it's funny because it resonated. The word resonated. Because it really is about the three of us all, of course, have had previous musical, backgrounds and histories and careers and stuff. And so sort of a reset, at this point in our lives, musical resets, the random thing that a Polish guy, a Brazilian guy, and an American guy all come together as some sort of heavy metal United Nations and start a new band, the album, as you said, To Hell and Back is it's a story, and it's a completed thought, from the needle drop of the sort of nice ramp up of this sound, and as you see in the music video, standing out in the forest, kind of looking back over the sort of land that we've covered, sort of the scorched earth, journey that we've had. To the end of Severance, which is a similar musical piece. It's kind of a reprise, if you will.
Yeah, full circle there.
Kind of a full circle, which that doesn't always work on most albums, but it worked well on this one. To sort of recap the story, and all of a sudden, by the time you get to Severance at the end, it's like a more majestic, uplifting. It's like this breath of fresh air. The weight of the world is off of you. You've gone through hell and back, and now the story's been told, and it's like, refreshing.
I have to say, I love the synchronicity of how the album started and how that finished. It was a well thought out machine. And like you mentioned, sometimes that doesn't work, but I found that it really did tie together nicely in this case.
It's kind of a concept album without setting out to make a concept album, man. And I think the title says it all, To Hell and Back. It's like, and I think that the good thing about it is most listeners, if you're honest with yourself, we've all been through some form of hell and back,
Of course.
That of by our own hand or that which has been forced on us. It's called life, right? So it is what it is. So, I think I'd like to hope that resonates somehow with listeners. And then, like I say, the story that's told, it hits pretty hard, obviously, off the top, 4 songs or so. And then, then it starts to go into some stuff, Free Us, Heavy as the Crown, Free Us All, Walk With Me Forever is sort of the, this really, I hate to use the word sensitive, but it is kind of this moment where, it allows us to really just kind of open it all up, and rather than coming out of it, just go, well, you're in a death metal band and I was a thrash metal band, and we better just do that. We decided, what, we're going to just allow whoever brings an idea in to bring it in. And the album wrote itself, the record itself formed itself, and, it's very organic. It was not forced. And we didn't make a plan. We need 10 songs. We need this. We need a ballad. It didn't do any of that. It just made itself, And I think then you kind of know when it's done too. You go, you know what? That's it. That's it right there. Those are the songs that tells the story. That's the narrative. Let's put the bookends on it. We're done. Let's get it out, you know.
Was that challenging for you then, going from, because you do come from a thrash background and they do come from a death background, but the album itself is death metal. Was that challenging at all, going from?
Well, you know, we had a discussion about that. Like, what is Dieth? Because, of course, now the record company and the marketing hats have to come out. And how are we going to sell this? You know, it's one thing to write a song; it's another to sell it, right? Yes. So, you know, and so we just kind of did this hashtag "We Are Dieth," you know, because we are what we are. We are who we are. It is what it is. And you know, look, we know. I grew up in an era of record stores and, you know, record bins, and you look through the, you know, A to Z and all this kind of stuff. Hey, where's the heavy metal records? Oh, they're in the back corner, you know. Yeah. As the pop stuff is on the end cap, and you know.
Oh yeah.
So you know, so we're used to this, right? So there's kind of, you know, genres sort of have to be sort of labeled a bit just to kind of where to find it in the store. Oh yeah, you know, the men's shirts are in the back, you know, this kind of stuff, and like it's like a department store mentality, right? So but I think as an artist and as a creator, you're not thinking like that at all. At least I've never thought like that. I've never gone, oh yeah, dude, this is a great metal riff, or oh, this is a tender ballad. It's just music, you know. And I think what I really appreciate about this record now is that the music, even though we work on that first lots of times, you know, the music goes from the foreground to moving to the background, so that you can hear the story that's being narrated and told through the lyrics and through me and Guilherme singing. And that's more of a mindset of like almost like a musical, you know, where what's the story that's being told here, you know, in this setting. And so I like that, you know, the music, the lyrics and the words and the singing isn't just sort of this grunting and groaning and, you know, but there's a real story told in there, and the music is just one part of that, rather than just coming at you like a freight train all the time and sort of annihilating your senses for 45 minutes.
So the album starts off with the title track, but then it goes into Don't Get Mad, Get Even. Is there a particular experience that inspired that song? Great song, by the way.
Thank you. You know, of course, I hate to ever say who or what a song is written around, because ultimately it kind of kills the listener's experience with it, right? It's like, I think the listener can go listen to that, don't get mad, yeah, you know, fuck my boss, or, you know, yeah, you know, and I've had enough of this relationship, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. And, you know, that happens being in rock bands too, by the way. You know, everybody thinks being in a rock band would just be the coolest thing, because then I can tell my boss to screw off, and I can tell my old lady to get lost, and I'll just go be a rock star, you know? And then you realize wherever you go, there you are, you know? So, you know, we bring these components even into rock bands. But, you know, my thought as I wrote it, of course, you kind of think about some situations. You're like, yeah, man, screw that guy, or screw that situation, or I'll get back at them, or, you know, and one form of Don't Get Mad, Get Even is eye for an eye, right? Which I guess is kind of an Old Testament thing. You know, you did this to me, I'll do it. Excuse me, I'll do it back to you, and worse, you know. What started to happen with this song, as Guilherme and I were talking about the video and putting it together, we both came to this mindset, because we're both fitness guys, and we go to the gym, we work out. And I think when you're releasing those endorphins and that energy in a healthy way, and you're sort of leaving it at the gym, and rather than on someone's face, you know, you realize, you know, if I can sort of direct this energy and this anger and my frustrations in a healthy way, I can actually become better and healthier and more fit than I was before, in that situation that brought about this feeling. So it's kind of the adage of the best revenge is living better than you were before. And, you know, driving around town with a smile on your face, rather than all sort of, you know, with a scowl, and, you know, I've my life's, you know, mission is to take revenge and all that kind of stuff. So, because I've seen that. and I don't like it. It doesn't play to my nature. I grew up in Minnesota. They call it Minnesota nice, and not
Yeah.
everybody's always that nice. But the general thing is, if you don't have something good to say, don't say anything bad at all. And I know that flies in the face of rock and roll, because rock and roll is always about, rebellion and anarchy. And anarchy is always cool, but holding a grudge isn't cool. It just isn't, because it's, as the saying goes, it's like drinking the poison and hoping the other person dies. Ultimately, you're poisoning yourself. So I think through Don't Get Mad, Get Even, and we tried to parlay it in the video, it's almost like sports teams. When you're down by 1 point and you're in the last few minutes, it's like, okay, it's time to step up and kick ass and like pull it in for the win,
Absolutely.
So I think that was more our mentality was, that final slap shot in a hockey game where it's like, fuck yeah, we freaking, we won, and hockey, especially, I guess you being Canadian, we can talk hockey.
All about hockey. Yes.
Right. Hockey is a sport that is synonymous with hard rock and heavy metal. You hear it at the games, you hear all my friends, all of our songs are played at the games because it's just that energy. So I think probably, yeah, if there was a sport we were thinking about, it was probably UFC and hockey when we were, kind of focusing the song.
It's a great mix right there. You guys are unbelievably tight for a three-piece band. The harmony is on point. Have you thought or considered about adding a fourth, though, another guitarist, maybe down the line?
Well, we have hired a guy to tour with us, just to kind of fill in some space, because there's a couple of orchestrated parts. There's some guitar harmonies. There's some things like that just musically made sense to record it like that. And then now you come to the point of playing live, and now in this day and age, it's like, well, do we just put it on track, and have it come through the PA? And I think for us, because this is very organic human music, it's not computer generated, this is not a digital band by any means.
No auto tune, none of that.
No, it is what you hear, and it is what it is. So I think for us, that we hired Hubert, who also played with Mihal in Decapitated, and a super musical guy, another guy who really is cut from the cloth of the death metal, the Polish death metal scene. He really understands this music, and I'll give you a comparison. When we were in Megadeth looking for our first guitar player to be the second guitar player in the band, we went through a couple of guys, and then Kerry King came and took a swing at the audition and landed it right away because he just fundamentally understood the music, the finger placement, and he just, in his heart and soul, he just understood it. He lived it, he breathed it, he was the music, right? Hubert's the same way. He is the music, right? So a guy walks in, kind of the fourth Beatle now, and walks in, and it just clicks. And I got to be honest with you, I've had to become a bit of a student of this music because this is not what I grew up with. I've been around it. I'm certainly aware of it. I played it, I guess, a little bit when I worked with Max Cavalera. I've played with Andreas Kisser from Sepultura, even though, I played the Sepultura songs. I even did something for Sepultura a couple years ago. They were doing, I don't know if it was a 20 or 30-year thing for Roots or something. I forgot what it was, but they asked me to play on a track. So I've been kind of in there, in the fabric of the, particular kind of Sepultura and the Cavalera world. So that's been really my musical interaction with this genre is through them, and which is great because let's face it, they're kind of the origin story of it in our modern world, right? And it's fun that it originated out of Brazil because Guilherme is Brazilian, and that's where I realized the Portuguese language really is very musical in a death metal setting because death metal by its nature is, it's very hard.
It is
in its attack and its approach. Yet this Brazilian Portuguese is very musical because it's a Latin language, right? As opposed to it being more the Slavic languages, which are very, I would say, not as musical to the Western ear, right? So whereas the
Thrash
Latin language is.
That's also, they go hand in hand. I mean, it's such a nice transitional moment. You have a lot of death metal bands that were influenced by thrash as well. And it all comes down, I think, to growth. And there was a moment, a big transitional moment on the album for the song that you were singing, the track Walk With Me Forever. I did not expect to hear a ballad on the album. It was a double take, but I have to say, I loved it. I loved it.
Thank
what
you.
was that like, though? What was that experience like performing the lead vocals?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I was always a singer in my bands growing up, and then I grew up in the 80s, 70s, 80s, especially, where there was always a defined frontman of the band, right? Yeah. And so then I transitioned more to being the harmony background singer guy. So to have the opportunity to step back up to the mic and sing a lead vocal, especially at this point in my career, in my life, is really it's kind of a fun gift, to be honest with you, because when you're singing, you're engaging other parts of your holistic being, right? So now when I sing and play those songs, I'm not just sort of playing it, I'm singing it. You really become at one with the story, with all of it. And that song, when Guillermo brought the song idea in initially, I said, man, let's just do it. Let's go there. And it really sits well in the sequence of the record. It tells the story nicely. I think about, these records, like I remember when hearing Master of Puppets, when they started Welcome Home Sanitarium, and it had this nice clean tone. It was haunting. But it wasn't an onslaught. Yeah, it wasn't an onslaught. And I thought, okay, this is album 3 that they did it. So I'm like, fuck it, let's do it on album 1, because now
I like that attitude. Fuck it, let's just do it.
Fuck it, let's just do it right now. Let's because to me, what it did is it widened the whole scope of the band. I think it widened our path moving forward for the subsequent albums and songs we can write, because we've now just said, hey, we're doing this,
definitely opens the door for sure.
It does. And being the singer on it, it's, first of all, it's in a register and a key that's very comfortable for me. And I think that's important. I used to be a high tenor, then a low tenor. Now I'm a high baritone, right? So over the years, our voices drop. And so it sits comfortable for me that I can sing it. I can tell the story. It's within a range that I think my voice has a kind of this woodsy, organic, sound to it that sits nice inside of it, sits well inside of the tone of our instruments. So there's a lot of components about it that I think work. And just for my own sort of personality type, I think it's a great way to introduce my voice and my singing personality to the world.
I also really love the placement, because you have this ballad track and then it goes into Dead Inside, and it just sounded like, it sounded so good. So
yeah,
big fan of that. Now you're also busy in general, not just with the band Dieth, but also your other project with Jeff Young, Kings of Thrash. You're going to be performing the albums Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, and So Far So Good, So What? And I have to say, I think fans are really excited to hear these tracks live. I think that is a takeaway here.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's I just realized in the last couple of years, I realized it over the last bunch of years, that these fans have really wanted to hear these records. I go to Mark Tremonti, who's become a great friend, and played in this big kind of modern rock band, Creed, of course. And the first time I met him, he goes, dude, So Far So Good, So What is my favorite Megadeth album. And I realized that the guys his age, that was the record that came out right when they were starting to listen to music. Same for me, Kiss Destroyer came out right as I was starting to hear rock music. And I had an argument with a guy over the Beatles one day, and he says, you need to learn the Beatles. I said, dude, the Beatles came out the year I was born. I missed them entirely. Yeah. Like, they just weren't even in my life, And I've since gone back and, studied the work of the Beatles and appreciated it, but it's not my story. It just isn't, you know. And you know, same with Led Zeppelin. It was, you know, they broke up. You know, Bonham died before I could see him. Keith Moon died before I could see him. You know, I finally saw the Who a few years ago with an adult buddy of mine. Said, "Hey, you want to go see the Who?" I said, "Sure, let's go." So I got to see this era of the Who. You know, so we come into an artist's career often depending on circumstances or just our age. You know, and so. You know, for me, what I realized is there's people like me who were there at the beginning with Megadeth, and they want to hear these songs because they haven't heard them. Just as much, there's an entire now, you know, this year, this summer is 40 years of Megadeth. It's 4 years since we started the band. And there's these many generations behind that now who want to go back and hear, you know, these earliest records, because it sets the tone for why there was a Rust in Peace, which of course gets all this acclaim. Killing Is My Business is the reason there became a Peace Sells, you know? Yeah. So, right. And so Killing and So Far kind of sat before the two big icon records, which is Peace Sells and Rust in Peace. Right. So these were these sort of ramp up. Killing ramped up into Peace, So Far ramped up into Rust in Peace. Right. So these were these records that have, and they're two very different records. You know, Killing is this very, it's got this swagger and groove and this almost R&B, often even funk. I mean, Killing Is My Business is basically like a funk song, right? Funk song with distortion and a lyric about a sniper, you know. But and So Far So Good So What is, even as I listen to it, is like, man, after 3 records, we really progressed and matured as a band. You know, so for me being part of that story, I can now look back on it as a retrospective and go, wow, there's really these were historical pillars of that genre.
Absolutely.
You know, and so interesting, you know, now fast forward 40 years later, now I'm, you know, working with death metal guys who are educating me on their genre, and I see how my genre inspired their genre, and now I'm the student. You know, I'm now the student in Dieth. You know, these guys grew up on my music; they know all about me. They've been doing death metal, so they've already got their thing. So I'm like kind of the old guard coming in. It's like me going back to college again. I'm going back to school again to learn about about a new genre of music. So, you know, honestly, I feel kind of like the lucky one. I'm the one getting the real education here on this.
Well, I think the assignments though are albums right now, because we have this new Dieth album. But then, am I correct in saying that Kings of Thrash, you guys are also working on something new?
Yeah, yep. Exactly. In fact, next week we're going to be working on some new material, stuff that we've already written. So we're going to just get in the studio and now cut the tracks. So.
Very amazing. Is there a release date in mind?
Probably going to, as we look at it now, they're probably going to be one-off singles rather than a full-length album, and that, of course, could change depending on how it goes in the studio. You know, the studio has a mind of its own, so we'll know more in a couple of weeks.
Will these sound like old school thrash?
You know, it's interesting. You know, because Jeff and I, you know, he's a Van Halen fan, as am I. He's a Randy Rhoads fan, as am I. You know, a lot of my writing, even in Megadeth, was So Far So Good So What. Then into the 90s was a lot of my participation. Some of this stuff kind of swings into those eras, you know, which I like. I think it's pretty cool. You know, I think, again, Jeff and I are creating something. We're creating a new sound. It doesn't have to be just always 4 songs of blistering assault. You know, it can be musical. You know, it's interesting connecting with Jeff all these years later, because he's had his own experiences musically and in life. I've had mine, and now we intersect all these years later. And okay, you know, it's like the family reunion. It's like, tell me about your life. You know, where you been? What have you done? Who have you seen? You know, and so I think that's the musical intersection that we're having as well right now.
Well, I have to say, I'm loving all of this. I'm loving the new albums. I'm loving the being able to hear some albums that I grew up with live for the first time. We were talking about going to record stores and flipping through. I mean, So Far, So Good, So What is one of the albums that really got me into Megadeth. And then it went on to Rust in Peace, right? And the whole the transition there. There was talk, though, years ago of doing a Rust in Peace reunion that never really materialized. Why didn't that happen?
Well, it was sort of thrust upon us by management. And I had said to Dave, I said, dude, we got to put the brakes on this because, look, first of all, we just did the Rust in Peace. We did a whole year of it. When I went back to the band in 2010, we did the live album at the Palladium in Hollywood. Was played incredibly well with that lineup at that time with Sean Drover and Chris Broderick. And I said, look, we can't bring the OGs back and have it not be as good as that, right?
Yeah. And
again, Marty and Nick had been off in very different musical headspaces since they were in the group. Nick had some health problems, and it wasn't long after. It was only a couple years later, that unfortunately he had passed. A year later, he had passed. So he had some health stuff. So, and this music, and life is harder on drummers, because drummers have to be very physical, and they really, and especially playing in hard thrash and bands and stuff, it really takes a toll on them, and for them to come back swinging hard and just really frickin' nail it as good or better than they were 10 years or 15 years prior. It's pretty tough. It takes it's like an athlete, imagine coming back out and shooting hoops or swinging for the fence and hitting grand slams like you were in your glory day. It's pretty hard as you get older.
My body sounds like a bowl of Rice Krispies already, right?
Right, yeah. So, it wasn't meant to be, as much as it was formulated by a manager as a great idea. I hate these all-star concepts, where you've got the marketing plan laid out. Let's just fill in the spaces. It's like, we're people, we're musicians, we have to click and connect together as the right, part. It should always start with the music, and I think we'll bring it full circle to Dieth, because then I got to jump on another call here.
Yes.
But that's what this is. This is a very unexpected moment in life where the phone rang to three dudes from Poland, Brazil, and the United States, and suddenly we have an album. and
what a fun album it is.
Good. Well, thank you. Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy listening to it. I went back a few times to a lot of songs, and man, I'm really excited for fans to listen to this album. To Hell and Back, June 2nd. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jessie. I appreciate the talk.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, have a good one. I enjoy the rest of your calls.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.